Goedenavond allemaal. Wat een mooie opkomst. Welkom bij weer eens een keer een event van ons chapter. Even de agenda, de ontvangst en het eten, dat hebben we intussen gehad. Wij zijn hier vandaag te gast bij Schuberg Philis, die dus eventsponsor is, waarvoor onze hele hartelijke dank. Wij zijn van sponsors afhankelijk, dus heel graag en heel fijn. Dus Schuberg, Frank Bredijk gaat ons even welkom heten. En dan gaat Maurice, onze nieuwe voorzitter sinds dit jaar, nog even een update geven van het chapter. En dan gaan we echt de inhoud in met Kim, Etzo en Brenno. En die zullen we introduceren tegen de tijd dat we zover zijn. Dus ik wil het woord eerst maar eens aan Frank geven.
Nou, dank jullie wel. Leuk dat jullie er zijn. Fijn dat ISC2, Nederlands chapter, hier is. Ook voor mij, want ik ben ook lid van jullie. En voor mij was het echt de ultieme reistijd. Soevereiniteit, een onderwerp wat ons allemaal aangaan of we nou willen of niet. Sommigen weten dat ik naast mijn werk bij Schuberg ook nog in de avond wel eens iets doe bij DVD. En hebben we onder andere research gedaan in de zonnepanelen en de omvormers. En dat is allemaal makkelijk. En gemak dient de mens, maar dient gemak de mens daadwerkelijk. Want wat je zag was toch wel een vernietigend rapport van de topsector energie, onder andere uitgevoerd door Secura. Die zeiden van we zijn nu allemaal hard van het Russisch gas aan het afgaan. Maar uiteindelijk zijn we daar wel voor terug aan het gaan naar Chinese stroom. Waarom Chinese stroom? Omdat je ziet dat heel veel omvormers en andere apparatuur die ons gemakkelijk toegang geven tot wat onze zonnepanelen doen, ons ook vastzetten en ook Chinese apparatuur binnenhalen, waar zij op afstand wat mee kunnen doen. En wij konden dat door die apparatuur te hacken. De leverancier heeft dat niet nodig. Nou, gemakkelijk, ik zei het net al, gemak is soms ook een manier om keuzes te maken. Cloud native was een aantal jaren terug een toverwoord. Cloud native is makkelijk. Nou, ik had net een gesprek met Brenno. Waarom gaan mensen nu? Ja, omdat mijn eigen IT-afdeling er 7 weken over doet om mij een VM te geven. En de cloud 7 minuten. En dat is makkelijk. Maar de vraag is, moet het altijd makkelijk zijn als het echt kritisch is? En bedrijfskritisch, daar weten we hier iets van. Nou, je kunt je vragen, is het makkelijk? Of zagen we onze eigen tak af? Of hebben we onszelf in een hoek geschilderd? En ik denk dat we het daar vanavond over gaan hebben. Dus laten we vooral ruimte maken voor de sprekers. Dank jullie wel.
Dankjewel Frank, dankjewel Schuberg Philis. Mooi om te zien, grote zaal, vol met mensen. Hallo, mijn naam is Maurice. Sinds maart de voorzitter van ISC2, Nederlandse chapter. Stokje overgenomen van Brenda. Zag je net zitten? Ja, oké, zit daar nog te beschuilen, goed zo. En we hebben afgelopen november een fysieke in-person boardmeeting gehad, waarin we dan ook de strategie, naar de missie en de visie hebben gekeken, om te kijken wat willen we nou eigenlijk bereiken als chapter. Dus we hebben wat speerpunten opgezet, we willen delen, verbinden en inspireren. En als het gaat over delen, willen we kennis delen. Dus evenementen zoals dit, maar we willen ook gaan kijken of dat we online de presentaties online kunnen delen op onze website. Dat is een soort resources. Maar ook gewoon onderling. Dus als je iets wilt delen met de groep, willen we kijken of dat we daar iets voor kunnen vinden. Want we denken dat het belangrijk is om kennis, zeker als het gaat over beveiligen. Wat is er gaande? Welke processen zijn er? Waar lopen we tegenaan? Waar kunnen we elkaar mee helpen? Om dat dan aan te kunnen bieden. Het verbinden. En hier gaat het over het netwerken. Dus met elkaar in contact brengen. Dat doen we natuurlijk ook op evenementen. Daarom hebben we aan het einde ook een borrel, een netwerkevenement. Maar we hadden ook gedacht over misschien een security café inrichten. En daarbij dat idee, het concept is dat we eigenlijk, we moeten nog een onderzoekje starten, dat we achterhalen in welk postcodegebied je woont. Dus de eerste 2 cijfers, dat zou voldoende zijn. Want dan kunnen we namelijk zeggen, als er voldoende animo's of voldoende mensen zijn in Amsterdam, kunnen we een security café in Amsterdam doen. Als iedereen in de regio van Leiden woont, dan kunnen we daar een security café starten. Precies. Maar het idee van een security café is dat we bijvoorbeeld 1 keer per maand op de tweede woensdag in een café afspreken, waar je gewoon voor je eigen hapje en je drankje betaalt. Maar je weet altijd, als je op die woensdag rond dat tijdstip naar dat café toe gaat, vind je wel mensen van het netwerk. En soms ben je maar met z'n tweeën. Als ik alleen ben, ben ik altijd met z'n tweeën, dus altijd gezellig. Als ik er ben, kom erbij zitten en in het begin kunnen we misschien een vlaggetje op de tafel zetten van hier zitten wij. Maar dat je een regelmatig terugkerend punt hebt. Geen verplichting, als je toevallig in de buurt bent, als je kunt, als je zin hebt, kom even langs. Dus dat is een idee, zeg maar, waar we mee speelden. Ik zie een aantal mensen knikken. Dus of uit beleefdheid of van, nou, dat is wel een interessant idee, laten we dat doen. En dan, omdat we dus ook samenkomen in zo'n café, leer je netwerk uitbreiden. Dus Mark, niet iedereen op LinkedIn, maar gewoon connecten. Net als ik. Maar eerst ontmoeten en dan zeggen, leuk dat we elkaar ontmoet hebben, laten we ook op LinkedIn connecten. Want misschien kunnen we elkaar ook nog eens een beetje aan werk helpen. Wie weet. Tegelijkertijd wilde ik eigenlijk ook weten, dus in dat onderzoek over die postcodes, wil ik ook nog een vraag stellen van, wat verwachten jullie nou eigenlijk van het chapter? Wat zijn jullie verwachtingen van wat het ISC2, Nederlandse chapter, zou moeten doen? Vrij open vraag, dus dat is onderweg. En dan inspireren. En dat is meer mensen, het uitbreiden van de gecertificeerd krijgen binnen de ISC2-gemeenschap. Dus nieuwe mensen die hun examen nog moeten doen. Nee, als ik naar mezelf kijk en het jaartal dat ik geboren was, kan ik mezelf wel nog niet echt op leeftijd kom. Maar er is een hele generatie na mij die ook in security zou moeten kunnen komen werken. Die ook gecertificeerd zou moeten zijn. En ik ben nog steeds van mening dat het ISC2 een hele goede basis legt om security in te stappen. Dus we moeten niet alleen naar onze eigen gemeenschap en eigen netwerk kijken, maar ook naar de jongere generatie. Om die ook aan te bieden dat er meer is dan alleen maar internet is altijd aanwezig. Tenzij je batterij van je telefoon op is. Dus de vraag ook is aan jullie als leden om ook als ambassadeurs op te treden en het belang van certificering, het belang van de organisatie uit te dragen. En met dat gezegd hebbende, kan ik nog wel iets als introductie over cloud en soevereiniteit gaan zeggen, maar dat hebben we vanavond 3 specialisten voor die dat veel beter kunnen dan ik. Dus ik zou nu graag het woord over willen dragen aan Kim.
Dat is belangrijker dan de voeding. Hoewel, daar kan je over twisten. Dankjewel voor het geduld. I will also get the microphone. Okay, thank you for the patience. I had the urgent need, like there's so much going on around sovereignty, to really update it. I don't know why I'm talking English. Ik ga weer Nederlands praten. Sorry, dit gaat echt, ik ga nog een keer opkomen. Dit gaat echt mis. Ik had dus het urgente noodzaak van, er gebeurt zoveel rond. Er gaat nog meer mis. Vertel. Third time. Just to check, is everybody okay with English, or am I then leaving somebody else out?
I don't mind. I understand both.
Yes? Great. So, and actually English feels better. Somehow I can more hide behind English. So it's less scary on the stage. You recognize that? It feels less personal than when you do it in Dutch, but it is also less intimate. So, hey, you win some, you lose some. So I felt, again, this urgent need that you now already heard 3 times to update it with the latest things around sovereignty, because it's really booming. As I experience it, it's really sovereignty fever. Digital sovereignty is almost the hottest tech trend that I've seen around. And the funny thing is, I told this story one time on a talk before, and if I look back, that was not a hype yet. This is a hype. Because I looked at Google Trends, which is really nice to see, how is a trend doing at this moment, and then you type in digital sovereignty, and then you can see how much action it had since 2010. None. Like, we were going to public cloud, we were not noticing, we were sowing our own branch, right? We were very safe, we were doing great. And then this peak, who can guess what that was? Trump election, yes. And then it was like, oh no, what's happening? And then, oh, we're actually okay, and then we weren't, right? So that's what happened, and a lot of other things happened. So we are now fully in realization that this is pretty scary. We are very dependent on some parties. And then the question is, what really changed? Well, at the very least, these things changed. So there's much more geopolitical tensions, and I think I don't need to elaborate on that. There's societal shifts. So I don't know what about you, but now you can actually have a talk with a friend at a birthday, and you can talk about Eurocloud. That didn't used to be the case, right? People would think, go away, nerd. But now it's okay. It's a relevant topic. And the third thing is regulatory momentum. So AI Act, Digital Markets Act, Data Act, everybody is looking at how are you going to cope with the dependency risks that you are running with your vital infrastructure. You're threatening the Netherlands. So, but that in itself, that's nothing new, and it wasn't enough, because this steep increase, these things were around. So what is added on top of that, what really creates a hype, is growing fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD. So publications like this one, this was 25th of November, Gaia X was an industrial disaster, published. I don't know if we agree, but it's published by one of the founding members. Wow. Then only 5% of AI compute actually is founded in Europe. Pretty scary. So we didn't only miss the boat 20 years ago when public cloud became a thing. We're missing the next boat on AI. Why are we doing that? And then the next one is, hey, if you didn't know you were dependent, we're going to make you very aware, so we'll just turn off the red button on AWS and Azure and Cloudflare, because that cannot be an incident, right? Or coincidence. That was deliberate, I guess. Training material. So that really feeds like, oh my, we are so dependent on these third parties. And then the final thing that really pushes it over is, of course, the rise of AI makes the dependency that we have on data and on algorithms way bigger than it ever was. Because we've entered the 5th industrial revolution, where we're talking about hyper-personalization. There will be a world where an application is developed only for you, to tailor to your specific needs. If we believe that that is a thing, oh, I promised Sander I would remain standing here. Should I restart again? No? So there's really urgent need. No, joking. So there's the 5th industrial revolution, and in this 5th industrial revolution, the person who owns the algorithms, who owns the data, will have the power over the world. It will not remain to be the dollar. AI and algorithms will get the power to the world. That's what I believe. And that's like the final thing. It means like there's already a lot of panic. Then there is proof, that's panic more. And then there is a future with panic. So that means that everybody is panicking now. So we're pushed into the sovereignty hype. And that is also what Gartner says in their trend reports, like we're right on the peak of exaggerated expectations. Well, this is more exaggerated disappointment or fear. So that's where we are. And then it becomes interesting because there's quite a view from the mountain. When you are on the peak of this hype, there is a lot of behavior that's really typical. So you reach this all or nothing mindset. Like, we have to do everything sovereign. That's a lot of discussions I have with customers. No, you don't have to do everything sovereign, right? There's inflated promises. Oh, we can do that within a year. Huh, no, we couldn't move to public cloud in 10 years. Who says we can move back? Downplaying challenges. Oh, we can catch up within a week. No, we cannot. Sudden consensus, like, oh yes, everything should be open source. Okay, it has its own downfalls. Sudden protectionist overtones. We should not do anything with the US anymore because they have disappointed us. Window dressing, showing off that you're having a sovereign cloud, such as European sovereign cloud from AWS. Hey, are you really sovereign? I hear opinions here. I agree. And then there is a flood of investment suddenly available, which we like, so don't stop that. And then there's a lot of short-term thinking, like how are we going to solve this tomorrow, instead of thinking of it as a strategic capability. So then you have publications like this in the European Financial Review. 61%, that's really an amount, of the EU CIOs said they will increase their local or regional cloud providers, and 55% will move to open source. My question would be, what framework? Because none is really mature. We've really tried to build an independent data platform only using open source tooling, and it's really hard and it's not mature enough. So you're losing a lot of innovation and value there. So my question would really be like 55% wants to go to open source, which is not mature. So this amount for me, published in a decent paper, right? It's this is what the hype looks like. So the question is really absolute sovereignty option B? Because I feel we're making an impossible choice. Both alternatives are really smelly. So, because if we fully move to private cloud again, to fully sovereign providers, what we get there is a lot of costs that we have optimized. There will be a lot of complexity. There will be a big innovation lag. So we cannot just start using AI or serverless there. And any open source serverless platform is definitely not mature enough. Unless you have some news to share. I'd very much like somebody to develop this. There's a false sense of security. There is a big skill and talent gap because there we don't have enough people who are trained in these frameworks and models. And there are a lot of immaturity risks. So it might be that we run massive security risks because we shelter a sovereignty risk. And that's also a risk that we need to maintain. So what I want to invite you to is really move beyond the hype. Do not go to this absolute hype-ish sovereignty, but move beyond the hype and go to sustainable sovereignty. So there is a few practices that I would like to show and tell that I think are the better option, because this needs a mature approach. And we know how to do this. This is not really new. This is a lot of problems that we have solved before. Because we should actually aim at something really completely different. The thing is, hey, we are fearing digital dependence, but the real risk is not the dependency, not the reliance on a party, but the fact that you cannot get out of it, that you're stuck. So if we invest in true digital resilience, that doesn't come from isolation, that really comes from designing a system that is easily adaptable when the world turns unpredictable. It sounds beautiful, but you have to be able to just up and leave, right? If you are always able to do that, if you can just take your digital assets, deploy them somewhere else, and run business like you always used to, then it doesn't really matter where you're running it. And that sounds very easy, and it's really hard. So that means that sovereignty basically is not so much exclusion and isolation. I don't want to work with this party. It is much more about sovereignty as readiness, freedom, and digital agency. So I dream of a world where you can safely deploy your workloads on any public cloud in such a way that you know that you're always in control, always secure, and you can always move it somewhere else. That will be cool. So how to create digital sovereignty? 3 steps. Understand the risk. This is really like you have so many certifications, all the 3, 4, 5-letter acronyms. So now I'm ashamed saying, hey, you should really work on understanding risk. Like, why am I telling you? You know this. But you should really understand risk and govern it. And then engineer for resilience by design. So make sure that you have this resilience by design, that you can always, in the right speed and with the right effort, within the available time frame, recover your systems where you need to, when you need to. And then the third one is, hey, even if you understand the risk and you have invested in making your systems more portable, it might be that you also need to extend some more in your stack to make sure that you have some sovereign options for those workloads that demand that. So adopt sovereign stack. So the first one, usually the discussion around risk really starts with, hey, we need a Eurocloud. So title of today, Eurocloud 2. I don't know what the 2 stands for. Have we tried this before? I don't know for sure. So, but I think there's many attempts. But this is usually what the discussion starts with. So we need something like a sovereign cloud, and then we're fine. We migrate all of our workloads towards there, and we're done. And I think that the risk, really understanding the risk, is a bit broader. So first of all, for instance, also think about operational sovereignty. The Amsterdam Trade Bank is a very famous example that went bankrupt. Does anybody know what system could they not access by which they went bankrupt? Yeah, of course you know. Frank cannot enter this contest. Anybody else who has an idea? Why did they go bankrupt?
I think it was their Microsoft systems, because they're a Russian company.
And do you know what Microsoft system?
I believe it was Azure Entra ID.
Oh, it's a... I can repeat it. So you said it's the Azure systems. I used to think that, and I looked it up. It wasn't the Azure systems. Anybody else wants to take a guess? Was also still, so Swift backend paying systems also still up and running.
I believe it was the Entra ID.
Yes. So they could not access their office systems. So also Entra ID was taken away. They could not enter their email, and that means that they went bankrupt by not being able to do their operational processes. So they could still access their bank accounts. True story, what I heard is that they were in fear of losing access to the bank accounts because those were running on AWS. And AWS was in the process of getting access away to these, or terminating these resources. But they were already operational bankrupt before that happened. And the CEO was trying to print all the bank balances. That was his job at that moment, which is a very sad story. That's how critically dependent you are. There's no other option than starting to print all the balance sheets. Wow. So that's operational sovereignty. That's also a risk. Then supply chain. So a very famous example, I think one that you all know, the Kaspersky thing. Like, of course, they had a sovereignty issue or they had a regulatory issue. But I'm talking about all the people who are using their software. There were whole ecosystems dependent on them, and some are still trying to migrate to another solution many years after it happened. And this is a supply chain risk. So it's not only about, am I in a country that is maybe under enlarged supervision, or am I acting good or bad? How are my suppliers doing? How dependent am I of them, right? And there is legal sovereignty. So what is a nice example is the example of ByteDance. Anybody knows it? TikTok, yes. That's a much more famous name, right? So TikTok actually had a very strange dependency. They were doing everything right only their customers were mainly US, and they were publishing all kinds of private data on TikTok, because that's the idea of this framework, of this platform, right? And then the president became worried about US citizens' data being in China. So in this case, it wasn't even them or their jurisdiction or their sovereignty. It was really the fact that people, their customers, were using it to store data, and that was not allowed. So sovereignty is very broad spectrum. And then we think, hey, maybe open source is the new safe haven. And it isn't, because there was the example of, and then it wasn't open source necessarily by itself, but GitHub at a certain moment, due to sanctions, took access for all people in Iran away. And that meant that all very important contributors to some of the core open source systems could not contribute anymore. A very indirect risk. Another example, that was funny, like it's now the other way around. So the Iranian government has said, you cannot use GitHub anymore. So you cannot use NPM packages or PyPy packages anymore. So, and that really surfaces and shows how big the risks is, because this post was very interesting for me. Like, I've been trying to use a mirror install, and I cannot get it to work. This is only deploying or installing it. And then I hear people talking about, hey, it's open source, so when something happens, we can always take over maintenance of the source code. We cannot even install it if we don't have the right deployment tooling, right? So there's a big risk. It's not that we can take a multi-million package and then we can say, hey, probably in 3 months we have all the knowledge management and we understand everything of this package and we can take over maintenance. That's not true. So open source is not just a safe haven. It can be still very critical, very dependent. I'm not saying don't do open source, just be mindful of this. If you do open source, the best way to shield this is be a very active contributor. That's really a shielding of your risk. And there's many silent dependencies, because a lot of people are talking about where am I running my workloads, where am I running my data? And very important other questions are, where's your identity and access management? Where are your keys? Where's your data control plane? So yes, you can recover from a backup, but then do you still have the access rules to the data? If you don't, you cannot put it open, right, for the world. You cannot just leak all the data because you didn't have it anymore. Backup, disaster, and failover. Like, how autonomous are you on those processes? So many of customers have a multi-region backup, which still has the same core dependency, right? So where are you putting your backups? Security and observability. So a lot of tooling around that. Super important. How do you make sure that you have your observability arranged without possible intervention of any bad actors? Collaboration tooling. So this is where the Microsoft suite really comes in. Are you sure you can still get your notifications, your Office, your processes in place? CDN. Well, Cloudflare showed us what the impact is, right? I think 3 years ago, Akamai showed us. Both big. So how sovereign is your CDN? How much authority do you have over it? What will be the impact if your CDN starts failing? Then your business services. So things like payments, KYC, AML, your customer notifications via SMS or push notifications, all these things are also potentially a critical dependency, right? So it's very broad. And then, of course, your third-party services. That's often looked at. So the basic question that we need to ask is, hey, can we keep operating if a provider, region, or jurisdiction becomes unavailable? And that's a really hard question to ask. So I'm very happy that this was recently published because I found it a very helpful framework. This is the EU Cloud Sovereignty Framework, published October 2025. If you haven't read it, it's just available. It's super nice because it defines sovereignty across 8 layers. And those 8 layers at least give you a vocabulary and a framework to think about sovereignty risks. I have an example further down my slide deck about European Sovereign Cloud of AWS, because I did the scoring. And it can really show you, so what now are the specific residual risks that are still there for this particular solution? So it gives us a vocabulary, a framework of thinking that I find very helpful. Instead of saying, no, it's not sovereign, we can say, okay, this and this is arranged, but here are still risks. Are we okay with those risks? Can we accept them? Are they okay for our workloads that we're running on them? And those are the questions that you really want to ask. So the next actions on sovereignty operating framework, so to really understand risk and govern it, I would advise have a cross-functional sovereign team, because this is about legal, risk, security, architecture, and procurement. And none of these parties can do this in a silo. Make sure that you are starting with a sort of sovereignty risk register to make sure that you have your 10 most important critical services at least tracked and rated, and that you know how big the risk is. Define also your risk appetite. How much sovereignty risk are you okay running for which workloads? And pre-approved response playbooks and triggers. So if AWS fails, what will be your runbook? At least for your 2 or 3 most critical dependencies. And that's just topic 1. Are we already up for a break? Where's the beer? No, joking, there is beer, but later. So then we have to make sure that we engineer for resilience by design. So this is about up and leaving. So now we understand the risk, now we have to act on it, right? So the foundation of sovereignty is having a feasible exit, be able to leave. I think I said that like sufficient time, but I'm gonna try with the networking drinks to see if you can still parrot it. This is the most important message, right? Be able to up and leave. So what we've created at Schuberg to deal with this is what we call the adaptive architecture. And the adaptive architecture says we have a process that's already usually in place. We do a business impact analysis. We translate the business impact analysis into a CIA rating, and then we build systems that adhere to the CIA rating. In the current era, our suggestion or our approach is we need to extend it. Because you can have a perfect CIA rating, 333, and an application that adheres to it, but you still have critical sovereignty or resilience risks. The example of having a multi-region backup in AWS is one of the most clear ones I can mention. Because now for confidentiality, you have asymmetric encryption, double encryption at rest, in transit. You took care of everything, right? So, nice. Integrity, you're always checking that the data still matches with what it should be. All the processes are okay. Availability, yes, I have a multi-region backup. And still you're not okay. If AWS shuts down their services for you, you have nothing. So that is the edition that we suggest. That's the resilience edition. That says, how do you recover? And to make sure that you do resilience from an impact analysis, you do that based on scenarios. So the BIA is extended with scenarios. I have some more slides to detail this. So we're taking a scenario-driven approach. That means that in the business impact analysis, we're adding various scenarios. And for those scenarios, you will check, hey, what does that mean for me? Concrete example would be, we were in a talk with one of the supermarkets in the Netherlands. And they said, hey, when we're talking about sovereignty, we maybe would want to exit public cloud. Because we are a vital industry. Supermarkets are vital, right? We need food. If you talk about another event, such as a pandemic, in that case, we actually need to scale up our digital services because our physical supermarkets are down. So then we need public cloud because that is where the scalability is provisioned. So from one angle, we don't want it. Scary, get away. From the other angle, we seek it. Please join us, please be invited. That means that we need an architecture that can facilitate both. What you don't want is that you optimize for one and you forget the other perspective. Because what will happen if you do not plan for this is you will end up in a scenario that you did not think about. And you think you're safe and you're not. So that's why we take the scenario approach. The only way to really be in control is to think from this like 8 to 10 scenarios and make sure that for each of those scenarios you understand the impact and you plan for it. So that you get a more weighted risk and weighted approach. Example, just looking at geopolitical threats. These are already very, very different scenarios with a very different approach. So if tariffs are installed, you pay more. I'm not saying that that's really nice, but the amount of money you would want to pay to insure you against that would never exceed the amount of tariffs that's implied, right? Because otherwise, that's a negative business case. Maybe a little bit more just to screw them over, but a little bit, right? So business continuity is not affected. If you are worried that your system will not be supported anymore, well, you have to pay the tariff. That's it. There's no other implication than that. So you could say, hey, I do not need all kinds of supply chain risks managed. I just need to make sure that I have enough money to deal with the tariffs. That's it. If you look at regulations, hey, that can mean actually that I get a lot of fines and that my business continuity and reputation is threatened. Because public opinion will deal with this, right? But you do have some time. You have time to respond. So as long as you're sort of as good as all your peers, this is about the metaphor of the bear, right? You don't have to outrun the bear, just your competitors. For regulations, that's very much true. Because if you're better than your competitors, they will not already put you out of business. Because your business is required, right? They will give you time to transition. Which is very different than sanctions. All the famous examples that I mentioned before were sanction examples. They're immediate, they're irreversible, non-negotiable. This is immediate impact on your business continuity. How likely is that? Where are my sanctions potentially going to fall or impact me? Can I already plan for that? It's a relevant question. And for cyber warfare, well, I don't even want to think about it or plan for it. I don't even know how to deal with it. But it is also a risk, right? And for your specific business, the way that it hits you will be very different. So if you compare, for instance, Heineken with a government, cyber warfare will be a very different hit on Heineken than on our public government bodies, right? Sanctions will hit them also very differently. So that means that the only way to plan for these scenarios is for your specific context, for your specific business. Does that make sense? And then you understand the business and you understand the scenarios and you now know what the risk is. And that means that you can start planning for resilience. So that's the next step, design for resilience. And that's where we're adding the R. And that's a very different vocabulary that we need to adopt there. These are slides of my great colleague Dan, who's there, so thank you, because I really like them. Recovery point objective and recovery time objective are things that live in the context of accidental security incidents. Somebody accidentally removed the database. Let's get it back, right? And you can make an agreement, you can plan for it. It's actually quite a likely event, unfortunately. Or natural and incidental disasters. A data center fire is one of those, and you can plan for it. But it's very, very different from intentional security actions, such as state actors or ransomware. So then we need a very different metaphor. We cannot aim to meet the recovery time objective in that case, because we don't even know what is the last clean backup or what is the last piece of data that we can rely on. Sovereignty events are on in this area, in this context. So what we need to adopt there is maximum tolerable downtime. How long can my application or process be down before I can stop trying? Because I need not bother anymore. My company is vanished. All my efforts are just not worthwhile anymore. Maximum tolerable downtime. And then you have to make sure that for all of these systems, if you know the maximum tolerable downtime, that they are actually recoverable within the maximum tolerable downtime. That would be nice. So that's the resilience scenario. The resilience scenario can be restart. It is okay to lose all data, to lose the whole application. I can just start rebuilding it. So I don't need backups. I don't need data. I don't need the application. Restart. I don't mean restart like off and on again. But just restart an application, restart the whole thing, right? Sometimes that is applicable. Sometimes it's okay to really start over. Maybe, for instance, your personnel system. I mean, it's not nice if it's gone, but if you're a bit of a small company, you can regain the system. I think you can. Rebuild. So the data is safe, but we do need a new application. We need a new logic. For instance, serverless in the cloud is in this segment. If you have a serverless application and the cloud provider is not available anymore, you're looking at a rebuild scenario because serverless is not portable. But you still have the data. So that means you have to rebuild the logic and you can still use the data to restart your service. The timeline for that is months at best, usually. Re-platform. In this case, the data is available. The logic is still available. You have the application. You're just going to run it on a different platform. Customer off-the-shelf products very much are in this area, right? You can redeploy it on another VM in another cloud. You can restore the data, and you are theoretically up and running. So here you go from months to weeks or days. Then redeploy. The ability to switch instantly to another cloud. This is when you have your management environment, for instance, built up or provisioned for 2 cloud providers, and you already have a container platform that runs on both. That means that now you can actually have your containers. They're not accessible anymore. You can redeploy them on the other cloud. You can reinstall your data there, and you are up and running again. This is a much faster scenario. And the last option is failover. You actively have 2 running instances so that you can recover. But this is also the most expensive one. It's super, super complicated to do this multi-stack, multi-cloud. Probably not worthwhile for most of your workloads. So when we say, hey, sovereignty is not a switch, it's really a spectrum. It is about understanding the risk and choosing the right recovery or resilience option for each of your workloads. And that's a lot of homework. And then at the end, in the sovereignty framework, we also have a validation step where we need to trace back because you do this from a systems point of view. And the nasty thing about processes is that they're usually not confined to one system. So that means at the end, when you do all this homework, you have to look back. Are my core processes now indeed as resilient as I would want them? End-to-end validation. And it really requires this critical mindset shift. It means that if you do it this way, if you want your process to be individually recoverable, that means that you move from having a system that runs a bunch of processes to having a process that is implemented in a system. That's very different, because then you start actually making sure that each step of the process is designed to a system that is appropriate given the resilience risks. So this is a big mindset shift. Because usually we have a system, it does a bunch of features, and then we think, oh, we wanted this for feature A, B, and C, but it also does D, let's also do that. It's free. It's not free. It will impose a risk. It will impose a vendor lock-in. It will impose a sovereignty risk. Because now suddenly your critical processes is tied in with a process that's not so critical. And it just happened because it was free. So this is a mindset shift. Your next actions would be have this scenario-based business impact analysis. So just choose 2 or 3 scenarios and see, hey, how would that affect my business processes? Which ones would start failing? And which ones of those are most critical? Identify your 3 or 5 critical workloads with key risks. because you cannot amend them all. You won't get the budget for it. You won't get the people for it. So if you know your 3 key risks, you're already well on your way. And then define the target resilience pattern and exit runbook. If you can do this within a year, I think you're like top performer. It's a lot of work, right? So it's not next actions. I'm not expecting people to do this within a week. It's really hard work. And then the last option, now we understand the risk. Now we have designed for resilience. And it might be that we still have a bunch of residual risks that are just not feeling very right. So it might be that we actually have to extend our portfolio with some more options that are natively more sovereign. So that starts with assessing your current landscape. And this is what I promised you. This is the assessment for European Sovereign Cloud. This is a draft. It uses the European Cloud Sovereignty Framework to see how sovereign are you on a scale from 1 to 4, with 4 being fully sovereign. And then what it shows is, hey, a lot of layers are very sovereign, and the key risks are actually in supply chain sovereignty and technology sovereignty. Also in environmental sovereignty, but it's only 5% in the scoring. So, and what is that? Well, supply chain, the US provides the hardware. So now we have a vocabulary. And technology sovereignty, well, what is deployed on the European Sovereign Cloud is the AWS Cloud Platform, technology risk. Those are the 2 key risks that we still run when you use European Sovereign Cloud. So now we understand, now we can plan for it. And then the resilience ask versus the supply. So with all the resilience options you want from your workloads, that's the ask. And then look at what you have in your portfolio. How sovereign are your solutions? There might be a gap. And that means that you start changing your portfolio. I'm going to skip this slide because I'm in time pressure. At the end, it might be that then the answer is, we need a Eurocloud. So that's the end of the assessment. Because it might be that you find yourself not having sufficiently sovereign solutions to actually deal with the risk. That re-architecting your applications to make them interoperable or portable enough will not have sufficient mitigation for the risk. And if that is the case, then Eurocloud is an excellent idea. I hope that makes sense. Then the very last thing, I'm sorry, do I want to go back? Yeah. And then the very last thing is also digital agency in emerging tech. So when we talk about sovereign tech, this is a very specific topic that we also need to address. Because emerging tech really asks for their own approach. Yes?
Hi. I had a question about the conclusion we need a Eurocloud. Well, in step 2, you had one of the scenarios was to re-platform. Well, if you try to do that, then you also come to the conclusion that you need a Eurocloud.
That might very well be, yes. That really depends on your system design. Because a Eurocloud, at least how I interpret it, is a little bit different than a private cloud. So if you are able to re-platform to your own private cloud, and there are companies big enough to have those, and you have sufficient capacity for your most critical processes, you still not necessarily would mean that you need an Eurocloud. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. But most of the companies use AWS, Azure, or Oracle Cloud. So they're all American, all in American hands. So this,
yes.
So it is not a Eurocloud. Only if you get a public cloud, indeed, private cloud. I mean.
Yeah, so in the event of a geopolitical, let's say, cyber warfare or sanctions, probably all those platforms would become unavailable for us at the same time.
Yes.
But in another event, for instance, AWS goes bankrupt, I'm not saying that's a very likely event, but it's also a sovereignty event. In that case, re-platforming to Azure or to GCP or Oracle Cloud would be perfect. because I imagine they are far from bankrupt because now they get all AWS business, which is nice.
Yes. It's,
Who doesn't want that, right?
yeah,
So,
it's good to mention.
so you're right. Like, I would think that it's beneficial to have Eurocloud. I do agree, but it is really a little bit broader because replatforming. I know that right now around 80% of workloads that are actively in production are still a VM or container. So we're not like fully cloud native. Everybody talks about it, but it's not that we're massively successful. So there are still a whole bunch of companies that could actually replatform to private cloud and do not really need a Eurocloud, because running IaaS and PaaS container service is something we can really manage.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yes?
Yes.
1 minute. Oh no. So having emerging tech means a little bit of a different approach. Making sure that you can sandbox that and that you have enough control to do this in public is really the go-to strategy. Because what you want is to really ride the wave of innovation. And if you always have to replicate what somebody else is innovating, you're always slow. And then the reverse is also true. You want to be in that environment to steal their ideas. And it's actually legal, sort of, to copy the patterns, right? So that means that to make sure that you have digital agency in emerging tech, you have to be really excellent at sandboxing those initiatives. That's the go-to approach there. Last slide, sovereign stack. So your next actions, extend your architecture with sovereign alternatives. And one of them could be Eurocloud, but it could also be your private cloud. Insert sovereignty criteria into your RFPs and renewals. Establish a reference sovereignty by design architecture using open standards. Publish it internally so that people know this is what we want you to architect towards. And implement customer managed keys so that you are certain that you are able to stop access of data in any of the hyperscalers. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. We have like 10 seconds for one question. I started late because of the 3 attempts. That's also true.
Question.
I see one question. Yes.
So the adaptive architecture from the perspective of the business, the processes and applications is really from the perspective of the organization you are in. From the experiences you've had so far at Schuberg with the clients, are you also seeing them opening up to look at cooperation within a sector, that they maybe pull resources in order to enable them to have more options in their resilience strategy? Do you see that happening? Because the reason why I ask this is because the problem at hand seems to be so significant that individual organizations will probably be benefited if they work together.
Yes, so I see people, when you have an open discussion about sovereignty as an idea, it comes across. Specifically in banking in the Netherlands, I know that these parties come together quite often. So it is something that as an idea is pitched. What I don't see is any concrete steps towards it or any concrete action. So it doesn't leave the table of ideas yet. I think it will be interesting. Another way to look at it is, of course, companies like Schuberg Philis, who are managed service providers for a bunch of these companies, can also be the place where they centralize this. And I see that more. I see more action on that, which makes sense because companies like ours have an incentive on that one, right? And it deals with the problem. If we do this together and one of you wants to stop, do I then take over the load? What happens to me when I invest in a shared platform and you step out of it and I don't have a shared platform anymore? So it deals with the legal and contracting and continuity elements. But it would be nice if this happens. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you for listening to me, and see you at the drinks.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the lovely presentation. A lot of topics overlap, but go in a different perspective. All my slides the last 15 years or something, I make public with the QR code. No login is required. Usually I have references below the slides, but this is such a difficult topic, I dedicated an appendix with, for every topic, many references. So that the slides didn't get too crowded. And here you can find it, and I think it will be sent or published on my website also, but if you don't want to forget it, here it is. Yes, we did fumble the ball. First, some context who I am, because context matters. So I started programming in '93, and as a child starting building websites. And when I was done at high school, I immediately, when I was 18, started my company in web hosting with Slackware. And I ping-ponged between infra and program management and in between over the years. So I'm a bit schizophrenic in that part. So a bit OpenBSD, Slackware part, and creating websites where people could collaborate. Yahoo groups and similar stuff. I see some old people, so that's good. And after that, some projects from slowly local to international projects, because I came to a conclusion that when you master the IT part, it's not the IT part that matters and that decides what's going on. And that slowly started to get my interest. And it ended today, since 1.5 years I'm a freelancer, and I try to balance give more time to education. So I started teaching enterprise architecture at the Hogeschool Utrecht. Also cybersecurity at Android Management School. And I'm now doing my PhD in cyber resilience. Because I'm really interested that what we started as the internet, we created an interesting chaos machine that is affecting business operations a lot. And we have no answer for that yet. And I want to share all the knowledge you have, and that's why I like that we are now recording this and putting the slides on there, because this is not a topic one person can tackle, what we created the past 30 years. And I think we need to be humble in that, and also that we need each other to find out how to get out of this mess. And I'm going to also do 3 chapters, just like Kim did. First, did we know what's going on? Then some reflections on what's going on around us, and then some possibility for solutions, because ending in a downhill note, that's never a good thing. So we end up with something to discuss. This is my second time I'm giving this presentation. Feel free to interrupt me with questions, and at the end, possibly we have a lot of time to discuss. So, part 1, did we know? There are some old people. Do we still remember this, that we had like old school stuff? And we had electrical diagrams in our manuals to replace certain parts of the devices we bought. I recently tried to fix my electric oven, and I thought, how difficult can it be? It's a propeller for the heat and all this stuff. I failed. My air fryer, I cannot even open it. And that's where we slowly are going into. We have the BMWs and other brands that say you need to have a subscription for certain features. We have a Tesla that states you're not allowed to fix the car if you're not the owner of the VIN. We're in a really interesting time at this moment. And that's the right to repair movement. So in America, John Deere is a manufacturer of a large tractors and for the farmers' equipment. They said what you buy is usage rights, but not right to own it and repair it. And we see that the same in software. We slowly move from you can type in the code for your operating system, you can type in the code of your game into, no, you have a license to install it from the CD-ROM, and now you have a license to log into the system to use the system. So we see in the physical world and the digital world the same movement to the right of usage and nothing else than usage. And the counter movement against it was, do you have a right to own? Do you have a right to use it, or do you have a right to repair it? And that's a really, really long discussion. Some of you might have read this paper or heard of the book. In the old days, there was a guy who created an essay on this. They stated, are we living in a cathedral So a beautiful building built somebody where you have the right to enter the building, enjoy the beauty of the cathedral? Or are we at a bazaar where we can select the products we want and then say, those hot dogs, don't eat it, use those hot dogs. And by that choice, you had a different ecosystem on the products that are offered to you. And this essay was a tipping point for Netscape that open sourced their source code to create Mozilla. And we all know Mozilla. And this also kick-started the creation of the open source initiative and Creative Commons. So this is not something that is really far away. This was a few years ago, and it were normal people that had written normal books and normal papers about, think about what we are doing. And it was the same discussion we are having now. Are we allowed to use something or not? And in the, I was pretty active in the open source scene, and we thought that open source had won. And a few years ago, I still thought that. So this is also a talk to myself that I had it wrong. Because we know that Linux is everywhere, in every device, in every washing machine, every phone, every laptop. Even Windows is slowly adapting VSL, and in a few years will adopt the kernel. The Steam Deck, beautiful device, just Arch Linux. It seems like the bazaar has won from the cathedral. Git was only created in a few months and quickly dominated everything with versioning. This is a beautiful innovation cycle we created as software users and creators. And when I look in pipelines, and we talked about NPM and PyPy, everything is about open source tooling. It's one big stack. But I question myself, did open source and the bazaar win? Or are we just creating really large cathedrals? Because it was software that is eating the world. So the pie is really, really big. And perhaps we are only looking at a small piece of the pie and don't see the whole thing as a whole. Because the software companies have an immense market cap. It's incredible how much money there is in software companies of the total economic system. And that means that those big profit organizations, they do contribute something to our open source. Not that much. We saw the discussions with curl and with the FFmpeg. They make an impact, but perhaps their power is way more larger than what we thought that the bazaar is winning. And for that we need to zoom out. So how big is that pie and what's going on? Why did software eat the world? I teach enterprise architecture, and usually I use this model as a meta model of an organization. I'm not certain if you recognize all the things, but the idea is that an organization about having a strategy and trying to achieve the strategy by having business process, business organizations, and below that, we need some information, managed information systems running on infrastructure. So I was happy that in the previous presentation we were talking about changing the business processes. Well, we did it a lot. The last X years, we outsourced a lot of business processes because that saved a lot of money, and money makes the world go round. So we changed from investing in our own people, investing in our own hardware, investing in our own support. We said, no, let somebody else do that. And then we only pay a subscription fee, a yearly fee for that. And we outsourced a lot. Total business processes, part of security, your SOC, for example, or something about first and second line help desk. And this created a lot of money for the different companies, but also it outsourced something. And we did the same thing in IT. In IT, we thought first, we have some hardware on-prem, and slowly we moved all the knowledge away. We said, this is interesting because we are changing the CapEx-OpEx dynamic. And that is a lot of money, and that makes the world go round. So that's a good thing. And that's a win, because so a lot of things become more efficient, and also we have a predictable income for the people that are delivering those services. Because the subscription, we know from Atlassian and other companies, it's really logical for them to switch to a service model, licensing model, because they have a predictable income. So this is a feedback loop that makes sense in a world where the money is important. So basically, perhaps if we zoom out, it's not that the bazaar was created by open source and other stuff, but financial engineering created a bazaar from a lot of cathedrals. A lot of products that are amazing, that we use, but we cannot get out and cannot control. And that means that there's something behind that, because we had some discussions with organizations, do you want to use that tool? I said, yeah, we have a contract with them. We have an SLA. They won't do this, they won't do that. But we forgot that those companies have their own thing to do. They want to make their own money, they want to be efficient, they need to comply to their local laws, not to my laws, but to their laws. And that's something we forgot, because we could look at the spreadsheet and say, hey, CAPEX, OPEX, there's a lot of more money in the next 2 years, let's go away. And that's something that we did not look into. I assume most of you don't know the term ambidexterity, that you are left and right-handed at the same time. This is also a term for business management. So it's about dynamic capabilities, and about that in an organization you need to have a balance between exploiting, so making money of something, being efficient, and exploring, R&D, finding out what's going on, testing things. There's a certain balance in this. And my statement is that in our international hyper-connected reality, so I'm using AWS with a company in Japan, we have people that work in South Africa, we created really a global village with a lot of intense exploration and exploitation. So we innovate like crazy, we want to make more money, and we are focusing on more interconnections. That brought us a lot of innovation. So this is not per se a bad thing, but it's a thing that happened. And that's an issue, because we warned, I said a cathedral and a bazaar, we warned for the black boxes. We warned that in a cathedral you cannot do all the things. And we had that conversation, but in the end, the need for making money and being innovative won from us. So there somehow we dropped the ball. Because we knew, we had the conversation, we had the documents, we acted upon it, and suddenly we lost focus on that. And there was a reality check. And that's, yeah, it's 2013, so it's way longer ago than I thought. I don't know if everybody still remembers WikiLeaks. Yeah, and that is like the pebble of the avalanche. And that's the thing. Because there we noticed that it was not all kind of scary movies what's going on, but it was reality. We had suddenly proof that international governments, governments over the world really want to have each other's information and are really trying to protect their own right. And that makes sense. That is the whole idea of having a country, protect your own stuff. So this is not per se a bad or good thing, but that happened a lot. So before that we communicated between data centers without encryption, and suddenly they're eavesdropping between data centers. But they're doing a lot more. So suddenly the isolation of your tech stack was a whole different ballgame. If you want to know more about this, the journalist Applebaum from in Germany has a lot of interesting talks about this. And even Argos, our Dutch research program, has something similar called Crypto Leaks about what happened in Switzerland and how international governments collaborated to eavesdrop in each other. It's so interesting that it feels like a spy novel, but it's reality. And now with Trump, we know the reality is really hitting our door. But this is 2013. That's darn long ago. I also hope that you know this guy. Austrian, beautiful guy. He was a student, Schrems, and he started a lawsuit. I'm not a law scholar, so I implore you to look at slides from Linda Terlouw. She is really smart on the topic of Schrems and the different laws that, for example, in the American context, have influence on people working and living in the EU. And Schrems was a guy who said, yeah, we have those legal contracts between companies and between Europe and US, but it doesn't hold true. Because he stated that no matter which law you have, the national law is stronger. So in a contract between the EU and the US law is always stronger. And that's logical, because the US wants to protect their own citizens, just like we. The GDPR accounts for every company or organization that has data of EU citizens. And the same does the states. It's not about cloud tax, it's way more interesting parts. And Schrems is a guy who doesn't give up. I really enjoy that. I have respect for this guy. He started as a student, and now, so many years later, he's still trying to go into court where the EU and the US says, we have a new contract. He says, no, that contract is still invalid. And he keeps on winning the higher court cases. So we have people that know what's going on, and they are still fighting for us. And I think that's a positive thing that we need to learn from, because we learned from WikiLeaks, we learned from Schrems, but there are also other people that we learned from. I have no idea if you know these books, but if you want to read interesting stuff, podcasts and a lot of YouTube films are about them. The Weapons of Mass Destruction is about telling, hey, if we have our actions defined by algorithms, it's the data that decides what's going to happen and not the people anymore. And we see the same now with AI. If we make decisions based on models and you don't know what's inside of the models, you are giving your autonomy to the algorithms. And they are really, really warning for that for many years. And it's the same from Yanis. He states, the interesting part is that Facebook is so big that the economy is larger than many countries. And they're not controlled by democracy. So the question here is, do we want to have that? So much power that nobody can say, stop doing that because they're too big. That's something to think about. So we're going to reflect about that. And the question basically is, if you have a company, and I'm dealing with the company, does that company chooses for as a consumer, my rights, or for their rights as a company? And it will always be their rights as a company. That's logical. That's what our whole business does. We make decisions for the risks for our company. And the risk for our company is also to comply with our national law. Because they can send my director to the jail, they can give fines to my director. So for that, I always try to protect my local stuff. That's the thing where we can choose. We also made other decisions. We chose for lean management. We chose for having commodities, having things centralized. Platform as a service mentioned here. We have a lot of servers and services. So because we have commodities, we can quickly innovate. We chose that on purpose. We chose on purpose to have cattle over pets. But I think people already have recognized the ship there. Yeah. The impact of that ship is pretty big. And that's only one ship for a few days. And I don't have to explain to you the impact of Colonial Pipeline and the stories if that's going to take 3 more days. So this is also the effect of that choice. We have less buffer in our business supply chains, and it makes us way more fragile. And the talk about the worm in NPM, not the latest one, the previous one, it was like detected in a few hours, and it was mitigated in 6 hours, and it already had millions of packages impacted. That's the same trick as we have with this global supply chain. So we need to think about that. Didn't we make the supply chains too long? Didn't we make it too brittle? And to hit it more home, we all know this one. And XKCD is like, I don't know, it's like The Simpsons, and he predicts all the things. But there are a lot of open source packages where people are going with pension. But this is the same for non-open source packages. Because every company, I've been in a lot of companies in my consultancy year, there's always one guy, or usually a guy in the IT, that are called back after pension. You have all the rights, go fix. We all know those stories. So it's not only in our packages, it's in every company everywhere. It's not about open source. This is a generic thing we do. And to hit that more home, this is also a lady that, if you Google her and find out what she's doing, it's beautiful storylines. She's a technical journalist, and she was the partner of the guy of Skyhub. And I think we all recognize this quote. The more we know about IT, and I've did a lot of interviews with the different hyperscalers and other stuff, we are just people, and we're just using duct tape and glue to make it work. All those beautiful PowerPoint spreadsheets, blah, blah, blah. Every software product, every pipeline, it's all duct tape. And we need to be aware about it. We should really be open about that. And I hope you recognize this stack a little bit, and else the short summarization on the right, you will recognize it. We created this technology stack for a long time. So I did some clients, we did maturity models in 2014-ish. This is also working for an AS300 from HP non-stop. This is not the cloud. No, this is what we did all the time in computers. And we built a system that's pretty unclear for us. So we know the golden tokens from Microsoft, where we had the hearings for. We know that the Enter ID part. We know the VMs where there were daemons without authorization that could do all the things. And we also know that Microsoft does monitoring in what we communicate in Skype, OneDrive monitoring, because they are mandatorized by their law. And the interesting part is, Microsoft is a really nice company with a lot of people. A lot of engineers, just like you and me, that work with the best of their intentions. And what accounts for them also accounts for all the other big companies and smaller companies. That means that I was somewhere and somebody said, yeah, but I give it to the guys at the big hyperscale. They know what they're doing. They are also people just like you and me. And there also strange stuff is happening. So we are not buying a higher quality product per se. We're buying out our confidence and ease of mind. And to be more realistic, we have unexpected downtime all the time. We have data leaks. We see it all the time around us. So the outsourcing part of my business process outsourcing doesn't change the deal that the data got leaked. We need to be aware as risk managers and other stuff that this is not the way to fix it. And even worse, Bruce Snyder, you might have heard of him. This makes sense, right? This makes sense that technology will not be the answer for all those issues. And everybody that's talking about more HSM, more this, more that, this will not fix your sovereignty problem because it's not a technology thing. And I'm now giving you a bit of a more philosophical but a realistic idea why this is. And you can draw this on a whiteboard. Some of you might know Conway. And the law stated that your IT systems, your organization, resemble your communication patterns in your organization. And that Habermas is a guy from the Frankfurter Schule, and he's a philosopher in communication. And he stated basically, no matter what you put down on your physical world, clay tablets, hard disks, you need to comply to a certain syntax and letters to understand what's going on. But behind the text is always the meaning of the text, de geest van de wet. And you only can get there if you go have a social contract with somebody. You can never understand a contract or something what I'm saying if you don't have an understanding why we are here. And that we decide that we speak English and not Japanese. So that social contract, the top layer, that makes how we design and implement all the layers below. And technology is way below, just like in the meta model for the enterprise. So if we want to fix a problem of all the breaches and all the who can eavesdrop on who and what am I doing, it's about the social contract, what are we talking about? And what are we going to do with that? And basically the legal reality is so a codification of our social world. And the legal reality is that a nation will protect itself. Because that's the whole trick of a nation. And to hammer it a bit more home, I didn't want to translate this in English because this is a screenshot of his own slide. And I want to keep it like he intended it. And it's at Logius, Bert Hubert also talked about this, to make certain that technology is not the answer to the whole sovereignty question, because it's about a legal question. But then the question is, how can we isolate? Because in the end, we did isolate our support. We know the TCS part with the last few big companies. We outsource logistics. Nobody has their own logistics company. Some people might have outsourced HR or HR software, and some people might use Salesforce. So the impact of your decision to outsource certain things is enormous on your company. Because Salesforce, I assumed it's a US company. They need to comply in the essence with the US law. because they're processing stuff from the other US companies. They are doing business on US soil. And the law is that you need to comply with that. So if you are using that service, and this accounts for almost everybody you're doing business with. Even if you do an on-prem data center, you might hire somebody to fix your data center. That company might do business with other people in the US and is also compliant to that law. And where I say US, you can also make any other big country in there. So this impact is enormous. And I don't think anybody of us can design a solution for this, because this goes outside of our scope. This is about international law. And to bring it back to a more technology level, we did outsource everything. And from everything in our supply chain, horizontal, or our tech stack, nobody knows what the full, complete SBOM is. The amount of software in a hard disk or the amount of software in a CPU, you have no clue. The idea that somebody thinks of my whole tech stack and whole supply chain, I know all the parts and I can rebuild it from scratch, is lying to you. That's impossible. But we have no clue what's going on there, because we made an enormous cycle about creating black boxes. That's the reality we need to comply with. And again, this makes sense because nations want to protect themselves. So, up to solutions. Like the speaker before me, she talked about limiting exposure and limiting disruption, and that is something we can start with. But we need to find a way that's not the same as we did before. So I think we came here with creating more outsourcing and etc. I don't think that's the way out of this. And I also think this is something we cannot do in a quickly manner. We need to think really hard about this with a lot of people, because this is not an easy thing to do. And I think it's about the classical white, gray, and black boxes. I think we should reduce the amount of black boxes. So when I was asked, can you say something about the security of a platform as a service, I said, no, I cannot, because a lot of logic is in a black box, and I cannot look in that black box. SaaS is totally the same. It saves you a lot of money, but you cannot look inside of the box. And I think we need to move back from that again. And I think the more you get inside in a gray box, white box area about the process, about the components, you can make a decision, how the hell am I affected and what do I want to do? So I think we need to limit the impact of a disruption of a business process, but also means that we need to redesign our organizations. And there's a lot of literature on this, but it means a lot of guts and mandates to really start to declutter our organization. Because then we can also limit the impact of disruption. And then we can also start learning as an organization. Because if we as an organization learn to quickly react on stuff, then we are prepared for what's going on. So I didn't say that before, but I'm specialized in resilience and anti-fragility. And everybody asks me, what's the first thing I can do? And my advice is always start with the number 3. Start about getting a learning cycle in place and get people into the learning modus, because we have no clue what we need to do to fix this. But we know that we need to adapt and learn. There are a lot of guidelines on this, so I did a lot of DevSecOps audits and maturity scans. And it's really interesting that how many organizations are on a low maturity of agility, low maturity of DevSecOps, but you have the standards out there. Just get those standards and get up and running. And invest in learning how that works. The knowledge is out there. And to make it more basically, move away from the SaaS. It's really actionable. More black box than SaaS you don't get. So move away from that. And preferably to IaaS, because then at least you have some data and the algorithms and stuff inside of your company. You know what's going on. And then we can start investing in EU solutions. But those EU solutions are also mandatory to a lot of legislation, so be careful about that. Number 3 will not fix your problem. And that demands for some open standards. So there are a lot of open standards, but nobody's using them. In the old days, there was the Google Data Liberation Front, and later it was killed. That was like a movement against all the other SaaS providers that you could not move away. And that's still the case. GDPR helped us a little bit by extracting data, but moving. And we as businesses never made this mandatory for all our outsourcing contracts. And that's really interesting. So we are locked in everywhere. That needs to change. And I think, so I made a little diagram, so it's not that beautiful, but you need to do something. So I think it helps to invest more in yourself and invest in yourself to get decoupled from other stuff. Because that will prepare you to adapt. So decouple your organization, decouple, like the previous speaker said, decouple your IT system supporting a lot of business processes, but use the scissors. That investing in yourself will help you when the opportunity is there to jump on the opportunity, because we don't have the solution yet. And if you invest money, invest in Europe, because that will help our European ecosystem to find out a possible solution, because this is way above our head. And then basically it brings back to stop sharing data. Stop sharing data to your outsourced platform as a service or SaaS solutions or your BPO. Because if you share that data, it will get leaked and they will have some foothold inside of your company. And stop those long, unclear supply chains. We don't need that. Reduce the complexity, go back. And that's an ethical choice. Do we want to innovate like crazy? Or do we want that milliseconds around the world? Or just do you want to need to have insight in your email, insight in the administration, insight in what your critical business processes are? And I think we forgot that. And we need to get back to that to gain again innovation. So this is my final slide. So basically, I don't think neither of us can escape the law of nations. We as a company... Oh, still, it's not broken. So perhaps a Facebook can do that, but most companies that are not bigger than a country in their revenue cannot do this. So that's reality. And there's no IT sovereignty. It cannot be, because a lot of suppliers are involved on hardware, software, on management. You cannot isolate from all those things. Those laws are there to protect the countries, and they will prevent that you can escape it. So that means that you can only opt for more autonomy. Decouple, be more resilient, invest in your own learning. And there are some legislation to help us with that. Yeah, so in those legislations are many more that enforce us to risk management, enforce us to identify supply chains, enforce us to identify capabilities and exposure on that. Please use that leverage, because that will ease the communication. And then we can invest in our own organization, because that is needed. So don't send the money to the credit card to Microsoft or to some other US company, but send that money first to your own company and later on perhaps to an EU supplier, because you need to invest yourself to learn and to become better. And then you are prepared for change. I find it really, I think there's a lot of money in Europe that if we reroute that money to ourselves, a lot of beautiful things can happen. But we need to make that decision that we don't want to have that beautiful eye candy out there, but first go back to the basics. What is our business? How can we support it? I think then slowly we can get out of this strange loop we are in. Thanks for your attention. If there are any questions, please do so.
Now it's on, I think. Yes. What role do you see for the European government to stimulate investing back in Europe and maybe also invest in European high technology?
I don't have an opinion on the role of EU governments, because that's outside of my ballpark. But I do think if a lot of companies in the EU, no matter in which country, we decide to invest in our suppliers locally and our own organizations, the need will come up, and then we can make a demand to the governments, because they will follow the big players. And I think we should not wait for the government to decide, because I think it's a bad sign that the legislation on risk management are challenging for companies, because legislation is not known for innovation and not known for thinking of something completely new. And I think it's sad that a lot of companies have issues with implementing the basics of risk management, for example. So I think we're in a bad spot if we are out-innovated by the government, because that's not their role. But that's all I know about it, sorry. But perhaps in the drinks, other people know more.
There's another risk I'd like to address. Investing in EU companies, that's fine. But EU companies tend to be bought by American companies. Look at Solvinity, for instance. Look at Fox IT, which was bought by England. If we make our European companies interesting enough, they'll be bought. And then we'll lose it anyway. What can we do about that?
Optimize for change. If we put all our eggs from a US supplier to Solvinity, and then are not prepared that Solvinity moves away, then your moving the egg strategy was not correct. So you need to be optimized for changing this, because more of those things will happen that we did not foresee and could not stop beforehand. So thinking out of all the scenarios, I think that's not a feasible thing. We need to adapt for maximal change in this, because all bets are off, because nations will try to protect their own turf. What's their role? So it's there.
I had the same question.
Oh, cool. Interesting.
Yes. I fully consent to fully rely on this story, but good luck talking to a CIO, to board members, or to even shareholders that want to use the next fancy, flashy AI in the cloud and all the whistles. No, and then we are going to say, no, please don't, and let's go back to the basis, and let's go build it up again in a more structured and more solid way. How do we sell this?
I don't know if there's one way to sell it, but I know it's possible. So the US companies also sold a lot of duct tape to us. And China, with their materials, also sold a lot of dangerous stuff to us. So I'm not a salesman. I'm really bad at sales, but I know other people can do this. Because in the end, it's a computer that runs somewhere. It's not that fancy in essence. It's only how difficult you want to make the labyrinth, but in basics for the most business processes. And that's also why there are stories about high-tech companies, Basecamp and others, that said, no, we are going to do it on-prem again, because in 2 years we got the hardware back. And we don't need non-stop incremental new hardware for the same business function. So now after 2 years we have a lot of money coming in that we don't spend on a credit card. And I think that discussion about we overshot with the whole CAPEX, OPEX part, I think that's part of the discussion. But there are also other shiny, I don't want to feel left out, and legal shiny stuff we can use for that. But I don't know, I'm not a salesman, but I know it happens before and we can do it again. It's just try it.
So I think it's a matter of incentive, right? And if we're looking at the current landscape, well, the example you gave of Basecamp, I think, is quite unique. For them, there is actually financial interest in diversifying to their own cloud. But I think for most companies, that's not really a financial interest. So what incentives do you see outside of lacking regulatory incentives? Let's be honest, they're not there. And I don't think they will come fast enough to foster this. So what other incentives do you see that would be a possible way to sell this?
I don't agree with your premise.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Perhaps I'm too old, but I did more DevOps guidance of teams and DevSecOps guidance of teams. You need to be really skilled and continuously updating yourself to know what you're doing by deploying workloads in the cloud. The AWS bills, some typos in your ARM template that creates a lot of puha, the newest feature that has a different default setting. using the cloud is equally as complex as running it on-prem. Because you need to be up to speed for that hoster that you selected. Because AWS is different than Azure is different than GCP. So I think there are a lot of business processes where it can be, you can make the case that doing it in an IaaS environment somewhere is way cheaper after a while than the whole PaaS part or SaaS part. And if you got more educated as an organization, what you're doing, how things work, and your engineers are getting more in touch with what they're doing, then I think even on-prem can be really interesting. We need
deny the
engineering
complexity,
skills.
right? I think it's more a matter of focusing on core business, like a lot of organizations want to do. And as long as we don't have providers that can take that load, I don't think that's going to fly, to be quite honest. But I wish it was.
Yeah, and that demands that we look differently at our organization. Because I think if we organize it differently, then we don't have the whole hoo-ha with all the lines crossing everywhere. And then we reduce the complexity, and then the business case makes sense. Because I've seen too many companies where everybody is too complex in their own complexity and not about what really needs to be done. And that takes balls to find out what's going on. And there's the business case.
Fair, thank you.
That
Okay.
was on the left
I
side.
also had a question, because AI was mentioned before, and it's not really in the story you're telling us.
No.
But also on-prem, I think there are not enough people with the right skills to run on-prem solutions for all companies, because now at the moment it's just a leak of knowledge for secure systems with all the AI integrations, and what was not mentioned before, mobile. How to access 24/7 all your data, the workload on mobile devices. All our next generations are working on mobile. And so if you want to try to make an on-prem database 24/7 with mobile devices, I wish you a lot of success.
Many schools do this.
With the hypervisor tools, mobile devices is Android, is Apple, there are no open source mobile devices. It is all the hyperscalers which have all the tools, all the apps, all the controls, all the security.
Yeah, I think
all the accounts as well. Everybody has a Google or Microsoft or an Apple account to use that mobile devices.
Yeah, so if we talk about endpoints, we're talking about APIs. And in the end, an API is just a call to a port where somebody sends data back. And there are a lot of people that do this. How much time do we still have? Check? Okay.
Minus 1 minute.
Okay, check. Then we'll find it. So those calls are there. You can do this yourself if you know what the load is. So one of the things I say, if you're the Eurovision Song Festival, don't do on-prem. Because you need elasticity. So at a certain point you have a peak. But not all our business processes have that extreme requirement. It's usually pretty predictable in a certain bandwidth what's going on. And the technology there is not black magic. The people at all the providers are also just engineers. The basics I learned a long time ago are still there. So it's about trying to learn the people around you the basics to implement and know what's going on. And then you can have a discussion, how complex is it? And do I want that extra complexity and buy it with a credit card? But I've never seen something that we cannot do as normal engineers that the other engineers in other company can do. So you need to invest in your own company to find out what's going on. And then you can make an API endpoint hosted on-prem with the database, no issue.
We develop software, and APIs is not that difficult, I agree, but making an app with all the security inside, specifically for business processes, for business data, with all the criteria which has to be to make it secure, is not easy. And it took a lot of development skills, and it took a lot of admin skills to make it 24/7 available.
Yeah, I agree. So I've been at a company developing mobile apps. I don't say for everything we can do this at the same time, but a lot of the Lego bricks in our information system are not that difficult. There's a lot of people knowing to do this, have learned it in a few years. We can learn this ourselves. We can retake the autonomy to do it ourselves. for a lot of those processes. And so at the drinks, because we need to cut off, we can draw it on a whiteboard and find out where the bottleneck is, a la Goldraad, and find out which part of that we can repatriate back to us and which parts we need to rely on somebody else. Thanks for your questions. I learned a lot about this. Thanks a lot.
Dankjewel, Edzo. Dankjewel, Kim. Ik denk eigenlijk, altijd vraag, fantastisch. Ik denk ook niet dat er meteen direct sluitende antwoorden zijn te geven. En daarom zou ik ook willen voorstellen dat we security cafés inrichten om nog meer met elkaar te gaan discussiëren. Want we hebben niet 1, 2, 3 dat antwoord erop. Want er zijn zoveel aspecten, zoveel facetten, on-prem. Eén ding dat ik wel interessant vind is... vaak zie je dat organisaties zich moeten gaan ombuigen door de IT-producten, door de applicaties. Businessprocessen moeten aangepast worden, want de app kan dat niet. En je zou dat andersom moeten gaan doen. Je zou eerst het businessproces goed in kaart moeten krijgen en dan naar je oplossing zoeken. Die misschien helemaal niet in de cloud ligt, die misschien helemaal niet in IT ligt. Want soms is het gewoon met pen en papier nog goed af te handelen. Pen en papier, of zullen we wat gaan drinken? Na de pauze hebben we nog 1 spreker, Brenno.
Brenno, ik geef jou het woord.
Thank you very much. And first, a big thank you for Schuberg Philis for hosting us today. I have a confession to make. I prepared my presentation in Dutch, and then I realized that was kind of a stupid idea. So I hastily translated it into English, or Dinglish, or whatever resembles it. So just that you know. And I want to start off by talking about the risks that we are talking about tonight. And that's not just a theory. We've got a new US president that thinks that the EU was formed to screw over the United States. And that is the current mindset on that part of the White House. The other part is, by the way, being rebuilt, but that's a different story. It's also not theory that China will show us who's boss. We've all seen the example of the last couple of weeks that we thought to intervene in a Dutch-Chinese company, and the consequences of that we felt throughout the entire Europe. We are also in a world where currently on our continent is a terrible war going on, and let's just for now stick to that. Fact of the matter is that we are helping and that we do see digital attacks on our nation because of the help that we give, directly related. And I think it's fair to say that we might think that our way of life is the way of life, but the world has become realpolitik. If somebody shouts really hard, if it's a government leader or a company leader, or both, it is not a theoretical risk that they withdraw the services, like Elon Musk did on Starlink to the Ukraine not too long ago when they did their offensive in the Kursk region. So with that in mind, I want to start off with thinking about what was security again. And I start with a safety rule. If we talk about fire, there's a triangle. You need fuel, temperature, and oxygen in order to have that fire. If we talk about security, we've got also a triangle. It's regulation, organization, and tech. Of course, there is technology, but the thing is, nothing will happen with technology unless there is a law or somebody pushing us in a certain direction. This is why we have standards, this is why we have a GDPR, this is why we've got many other laws. And if you don't start to push on that side, nothing will happen. And talking from a technology perspective, there is no reason why something like ransomware should have any significant impact. From a technology perspective, we can prevent it. It doesn't happen because the organization and the structure don't do so. So with that in mind, let's start with regulation. And I will focus on the US, not because I'm anti-US, but because it's the most prominent issue when we talk about Eurocloud. And let's start off with, there's nothing new. Let's begin with the basics. We have a European Declaration of Human Rights, het Europees Verdrag voor de Rechten van de Mens, that basically states that between us and the government, we've got certain rights and things we can do and we can't do. And if you're in Europe or you're not in Europe, it doesn't matter. In our system, we think that if you torture somebody across the world and you get to Europe, you might end up in prison for it. If we look at the United States, they also got a constitution. And human rights start directly after you entered the country. Else, the constitution is not for you, unless you have a US passport. So if you're in this room and you don't have a US passport, you don't have any rights in the US from a constitutional perspective right now. That's a fundamental difference that we need to understand between the two systems. And they're, for a large part, not compatible. Now, I don't want you to panic. And you get the sense that I'm going to talk a bit about planes, but not too much. But the thing is, we need to have a couple of basic rules and basic understandings on what we're doing. And this is a problem in our industry. We talk a lot and sometimes study a little. Well, one of the things that made a significant difference was Edward Snowden. All of a sudden, he showed there was something happening and something was being done with our data as well. And the interesting part was there, it violated the Constitution because they also did it with data regarding US citizens. So the government was intervening with companies for national security interest. Now, as Dutch people with national security interest, we think, for instance, terrorism. If you look in many other countries, among those the US, economic espionage is also national interest. This is again a fundamental difference with the Netherlands. So we know something is happening. Then, of course, they repaired a couple of things, and that gave the clarifying lawful overseas use of data act under 2 presidents ago. You might say Trump 1. And it allows the US to enter data of non-US citizens in databases all across the world, if the company has a significant presence in the US. Well, he was already mentioned, but Schrems showed that there was a clash between European law and US law. And twice the European Court of Human Rights said, the European Court of Justice said that it was not okay to transfer the data from EU to the US with adequate safeguards. So the second time they created safeguards. I'll get back to you in that, but the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board in the US was the safeguard that we as Europeans could at least complain or say anything. And then a lot of cloud companies and other companies said, like, but we have a SOC 2 type 2 audit, so we're okay, we're certified. So sit back, relax, and read a good book. But the story is no. It doesn't guarantee that personal data will not be touched by US government. it doesn't address the GDPR issues. It only addresses a certain number of things for very general issues. So this was already interesting, but at least we had the oversight board. Then Trump 2 came into power, and this is the inauguration. I think a lot of people know this picture. But a couple of people were there, and that made it kind of interesting, because all of a sudden we had Meta, Amazon, Elon Musk, of course, Google, and some other companies present there, which meant all of a sudden, what is here the distinction between the companies and the governments? And I already told you, human rights in Europe are horizontal and vertical, but the thing in the US it was only vertical. So now if companies start to intervene with the government, or the government starts to intervene, it gets kind of unclear what is happening. So Musk is a very clear example of that, but then you don't know what you're up against. But fortunately, we've got judges, we've got a legal system in the US, so nothing really to worry about. And then this happened. A federal judge orders a plane to turn around with people who are going to on their way to Venezuela, and they didn't. They went on. They ignored the order, and it got even worse when Bukele said that they received the people. Mark Rubio said, "Thank you for your assistance and friendship." So this was like a big middle finger towards the legal system. And unfortunately, it's not the first time that this happens. For instance, the mass deportations that are currently ongoing are against the Refugee Convention. And it's only not Trump 2 only, it's also started with Trump 1 ignoring court orders. But we've had illegal appointments, we've got legal cases being thrown out against political opponents, and the ignoring of multiple court orders. And if you're still at that, it might be, the Harvard Kennedy School a couple of months ago wrote that the rule of law is at stake. There's one that I didn't translate properly. And one of the most interesting remarks that President Trump and J.D. Vance made, that Trump said, he who saves the country does not violate any law. And the second one is, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. So basically, the story was, I am the law. And on one occasion, Trump literally said that, and that made me think of this one, "Les toi, c'est moi." That person, by the way, ended on the guillotine, but that's a whole different story. And then we had, "You don't have the cards." I don't need to elaborate a lot about that. I think it's still well known for many of us. But "you don't have the cards," the whole discussion about Ukraine and how you should deal and not to deal, ended with Zelensky going back to Europe, and all of a sudden the White House making a phone call to a cloud provider called Maxa Technologies that deliver photographs to the Ukraine. And they froze the accounts. The consequence of this was that the advances that Ukraine made in Kursk, which was for the negotiations very important, was annulled immediately. Because they had no information on the battlefield, and that basically cost a lot of people their lives. That's an interesting one. Then we've got the case, of course, of the International Crime Court that is not being recognized by the United States in general. But it's not just one case. And here the top prosecutor voluntarily gave up his own account in order to prevent the cloud servers from being cancelled altogether. Back to when Trump came into power, I told you about the adequacy decision of the European Union. But there were a couple of rules. And the applicability decision said explicitly that this organization needed to be an independent agency with the executive branch composed of a bipartisan 5-member board appointed by the president for a fixed 6-year term with Senate approval. This is important because, 1, it needs to be independent. 2, it lives for 6 years, it's bipartisan, and that means it's more than one administration in the US. What is interesting, when Trump came to power, I believe it was even the very first day, he sacked 3 people, being democratic. And that basically makes clear that it is not an independent agency anymore, it is not bipartisan anymore, and it's not a 5-member body anymore. Well, this case is still in the courts, so it's interesting what will happen with this. But this is a risk that is currently materializing into a problem if things don't go too well. Then, of course, we've had the examples with the undermining of a lot of US institutions. It all points in one direction, and that direction is that we have no system to rely on anymore as Europeans, and that poses a problem. So what you can do is, of course, lie in your bed, cover your head with all the sheets, or do watermelon compliance, green on the outside, red on the inside. But this is not the way to go, so we need to think of something. Then if you look at the organization you work at, for instance, they have to stick to all sorts of normative controls, to all sorts of regulations. It won't take long, and the Cyber Resilience Act will go into effect. Ultimately, in the Netherlands, we will have a law that implements the NIS2 at some point in the future. Yeah, before IP. Yeah, I think IP version 4 running out is a safer bet here. But long story short, both demand that we understand and can deal with our entire chain of technology. And the cloud has one effect. It's kind of hard to understand how clouds work, so that's kind of interesting. But we have to prove that we're in control. And this brings me back to a very central point I see failing in a lot of information security, is that we have got no clue who's responsible for what. And don't tell me I'm wrong here, because I do a lot of ISO 27001 implementations, and this is really one of my headaches. Asking for a RAS key can sometimes take over a year. Just say like, and then I say like, okay, just do the first 2, responsible and accountable. I would be happy with that one. That is already a pain. So this doesn't help. This doesn't help us in solving the issues. So I think one of the things we have to realize and to accept is that we have to be a little bit more aggressive in getting our basics right. Because not being able, oh yeah, I forgot to translate that entire slide. That's what happens if you're in a rush. Sorry for that. But you need to know who's responsible for what, who has got what mandate, and what authority someone has. And it sounds like the freaking basics of the ISO 27001, and I know, and it is, but it's unfortunately one of the reasons that I suspect that a lot of people like to throw their IT over over a big wall, so it's not their problem anymore. And you don't solve the underlying issue. So what might help you, is to start to check what things are there and do this meticulously. Because of my last book, I started to validate a couple of things because I make a big parallel with the airline industry, because when it comes down to safety, they have got little room for error because they don't accept it. And if you've got a big mouth or think to know it better or not to do your education, you can leave. And that helps. And not to skip a single step. So this is why I have a checklist here, because it does help. And if you look honestly to yourself and you think about plan, do, check, act, do you really do that? Or do you write something down hoping that the auditor will accept it? Last one. What can we do with tech? And I agree with the previous speakers a lot. There is quite a bit that you can do, but you need to think about it in a proper way. I think you can make a difference by starting to recover certain services step by step as you develop new functionality or as a part of a bigger plan. And there comes an important word. I was talking about checklist. A checklist is basically a plan. One of the cool things was that if you're trying to learn to fly, one of the things that they will practice with you are emergencies. And one of the things, I was taking off from Rotterdam, and my nose was up, and all of a sudden the engine stopped. And the instructor said, little joke. And I ended on the runway again, and then he opened it again, and we took off again. And he went like, okay, the funny thing is you now had 2 landings for the price of 1. But the thing is, when you climb up at a certain altitude, they will also close the gas again. And they say like, okay, engine is not running, what do you do? And you pick up a checklist and you start to work step by step. Like our first speaker said, start to work on scenarios and make a checklist. So for all these things, make a checklist, make a plan what to do and what to bring within your own control. And your own control doesn't mean that I'm saying bring it on-prem automatically, but at least, make it possible to migrate. If you use Kubernetes, in the Netherlands we've got the Haven standard. Use it. One of the other things might be, and it's actually an easy sell to the board, is let's do a multi-cloud strategy. Because sometimes Microsoft is cheaper and sometimes Amazon is cheaper. It's a very good reason to be able to migrate. If you use technologies, stick to the standards. The previous speaker was very adamant about it, and he is right. Make scalable architecture. If you do CI/CD, I think the example of not being able to use GitHub is a very good reason why you should be able to move between GitLab and GitHub. Sorry? Yeah. And start to practice. Thank you. And start to practice with backup and disaster recovery. That's an easy sell. But that easy sell just show the issues you have migrating away of dealing with interruptions. Because now it's not theory anymore. While practicing it, you find it out. Switch between regions. So do ask questions where your cloud is at least flying a little bit. And start to monitor more intensively. And yes, we're definitely not there yet. a lot of European services need to improve. One of the big issues is indeed if you go to Amazon or you go to Microsoft, you pull your credit card and like a couple of minutes later, you're up and running. This is not good enough in Europe at this point. We need to improve on that one. I was talking to Frank Bredijk. Yeah, hi. And you pointed that out yourself already. It's a pain we all feel, but this is something that is not that hard. It's not that hard to make APIs. It's not that hard to make processes simpler. But we need them in order for people to be able to use it. And Frank had a very nice definition of hyperscalers, because basically you say like that's a service you at least can use when you really need to use it. That should be your focus. And it's kind of strange, you know, to expect that it exists like this. But we need to invest in that. If we don't do that, forget all your ambitions of getting companies to, at least look at alternatives. And then one of the last things is with Solvinity, for instance, if there comes a pit bull with a lot of dollars in their mouth, you know, you should be able to run out of the building. You should be able to leave. So the issue is not Solvinity being bought. The issue is that you apparently did a procurement and cannot leave yet. There is your pain. Where is the exit clause? And where is the possibility to go to an alternative? You know, and don't whine about Solvinity. Whine about apparently you having now a contract that is probably closed somewhere after 2017, and apparently it's an issue now, where the minister gets to the point to explain that DigiD will remain Dutch. Well, I don't mind if the code is Dutch or not. I really don't. But if somebody else can decide to switch it on or switch it off, we are not in control. So I think that this is where the big pain and the big issue is. So those were a little bit my thoughts on how to deal with it. Start to look at grown-up industries, and we need to behave like grown-ups. And there was one cri de coeur that I would like to give. You know, if you keep shouting that things are too difficult and too hard to do, this is a schooling issue. We need to train people. I give training a lot, and I get people that dare to say to me that they haven't been in a training for 3, 4, 5 years. Your knowledge in the IT industry deteriorates by 50% in 2.5 years. So somebody who comes to the training out of university and like 5 years later has a quarter of his or her knowledge left. So I don't do education. I try to stop the fall down, because in a week's time I cannot fix what was lost over so many years. If you go to the stadium to watch a soccer game, soccer players work 4 to 5 hours a week. The rest of the time they are practicing because they are training. The game is the same, the moves are the same. And why do they do that? Because they want to have the best result possible. Now we're in IT. Rules are continuously changing. Software is changing. Technologies are changing. Laws are changing. Organization structures are changing. And we don't train our people. What's wrong with this picture? And what do you expect? So ultimately we get stupid to the point where we say like, yeah, only in the US they can fix this for us, but we brought it onto ourselves. So if we really want to make a difference, we need to make the difference ourselves. And if we would do that a little bit, you would have a safe flight. Thank you very much. Any questions? Outbursts? Yeah, all made with US AI and European AI and Chinese AI and yeah. No questions? Disagreements? Oh, this was the ultimate truth. That's kind of cool.
A lot of learning and training happens on the job. By estimation, usually 90%.
Oh, a lot of training is happening on the job. Yeah. You know that you're at Schiphol, eh? Yeah. If you go to the other side of Schiphol, there's this building of KLM. You go in there and you say like, hey, I'm a pilot, I've got a commercial license, and the rest of the training I'll do on the job. What do you think they'll do to you? And why? No, and also why? Because yes, you will learn certain things on the job, but there are a lot of skills you don't learn on the job. There are a lot of things like the law you can't learn on the job. How to communicate with the board, you can't learn on the job. Yeah, well, you can learn, but it takes a lot of job applications in between. This is really something in our industry that is an issue. We think that we learn enough on the job and that is satisfactory and everybody knows me, so my knowledge must be good. In grown-up industries like the airline industry, we say no. You go to a simulator and you practice certain situations and you keep practicing. If you don't want to do it, that's just fine, you just lose your license. If you're in the cockpit and you're learning, my instructor tells me once every so many lessons, if I make a mistake, it's your job to tell me. Those type of things you hardly learn on the job. So it is really important that we keep working on our skills in a broad variety. And one of the most impressive examples is a KLM example. That's the air crash on Tenerife, where a 747 hit a US airplane, and the technology worked in general. The planes functioned, and the big issue here was basically the captain and the toxic working environment in the cockpit. And after that, it was really clear that we needed to do it differently. And one of the things that came out of that already did exist more or less, but all of a sudden was very apparent we need to do it now, was crew resource management. And those are mandatory trainings now with every airline, where you learn all sorts of skills that have nothing to do with flying. It has to do with how to deal with authority, how to lead, how to accept that you're being led, how to voice up when a situation gets different, how to deal with stress, all sort of things that have nothing directly to do with flying. But we all know saves dozens of lives every day. So if we want to take our job serious, and before somebody starts to say, yeah, but the airline industry is about life or death and IT isn't, don't go there, because I've got a shed load of examples where people died because of IT, being in medical pumps, being in systems like the 737 MAX, being administrative systems like the UK Post. Knowledge is really what we need to prevent that. Yeah.
Yeah, I still have one question. You talked about airlines and safety in flight, and you also mentioned Airbus just. Planes are not very safe these days. Apparently it's not really the idea of how to make a safe plane is not the same as how to make a safe pilot. Excuse my English is very bad. So what can a pilot... Oké, hoe kan je zorgen dat vliegtuigen veilig zijn, terwijl je... want piloten doen hun best om veilig te vliegen, maar vliegtuigen zijn niet veilig. Hoe zie je dat? Hoe kan je nou als piloot daar op een of andere manier iets aan doen?
Couple of things. The question basically is, there are issues with planes that are sometimes unsafe. Actually, the example of the 737 MAX proves the point of what happens if you stick to software rules instead of aviation rules. Because they dealt with it like it's a software project. That made it unsafe. But you will always have in technology failures. That's evident and clear. But the issues with Boeing were clearly also managerial, organizational by structure, not the technology itself. There must have been some idiot that at a certain point said, like, okay, if the aerodynamics change, let's fix this in the software. I'm being taught now in a very old plane that as soon as you trim it for a speed, and the plane will recover itself always. So I do not agree that planes in itself are unsafe. There are tools definitely that you can make very unsafe. Actually, I think that most of them are built fairly safe. The big whole update issue with the Airbus now basically proves that we accept zero. So if you make calculations how many people will die and say like this is acceptable and this isn't, that's a norm that we do not accept. I might even want to go a step further. Since the Trump administration and their look at the Federal Aviation Administration, it proves that if you let go of all these controls, safety is at stake. So it even makes more the point. Will there never be an accident where people die? Of course there will be. There will be always jerks who do stupid things. There will be always a perfect cocktail or a perfect storm where a plane will go down, but it still remains the safest means of transportation. But if we step back 100 years, with little rules, with little regulation, it was a lot unsafer. So it's not about, it's not an absolute game, it's a numbers game where you try to be as safe as possible. But you cannot get, in the software industry, you think like, okay, God has decided that we are being ransomware, so that's the end of the story, more or less. And now, of course, I'm on that side exaggerating a little bit. But if you think about OWASP, I love the work they do, and I think they need to be praised. But it's close to insanity that we can make top 10 lists of the mistakes we keep making over and over again. Where PDCA should have been, oh no, there's something like SQL injection and we can fix it in under an hour. Let's do so. And we don't. We say like, that's strange. For the last 20 years, SQL injection is still at number 1. That's the point I'm making. In the airline industry, if you would say like, okay, metal fatigue is one of the biggest issues. Well, we've had a plane crash in the US 2 months ago with DHL. People are really now curious to know what on earth happened that you didn't stick to the rules.
The case with Boeing is that they replaced the technical people in management with accountants, which meant that Boeing used to be known for its safety and security regulations and rigid testing of airplanes before they went off the ground even. Those rigid structures have been let go because they cost too much. And that's what happened with the 737
And management
MAX.
went from Seattle to Chicago and from Chicago
Exactly.
to Virginia.
Yeah.
And how much further can we get away from our primary process? But at the end of the day, it was also the thinking of let's make a system that fixes this. And since software never has any bugs, we advise against the little light that indicates that the system kicks in, because if we have that light, we need to recertify the people in the cockpit. That costs a lot of money. Airbus will be cheaper. You know, it's the accountant mentality that basically did so. And to make it even worse, Boeing actively convinced Lion Air not to take any training. And then basically they said something like, we convinced the morons not to take any training. And it was the first crash.
Yeah, on the other hand, we have nowadays fighter jets that can't be flown by a human alone. They need computers, because the F-35, for instance, is so unstable. You can't fly it if you don't have a computer to help you.
Yeah. And of course, permission of a certain country to fly at a certain point.
Yes, they can be switched off at a distance, like the John Deere tractors. They too can be switched off and have been switched off.
Frank,
I like the parallel, and on the other hand, it's an industry that's regulated differently, that has different incentives, because safety there is a license to operate. You started off with a very convincing story, and in the break, I was witnessing a very interesting discussion about, is this hype or reality? And I think you made it clear this is reality, but I think we also know that if you don't put any other incentives in, money will win. So how can we, what change can we make? And I think it came up in your talk as well. You said it's outside of my area of expertise. I know you don't shy away. What change can we make as a society, as the people here, to make sure that we don't accept planes made out of duct tape and cardboard anymore?
We've got the tools. One of the tools is
not about the tools. It's about using
no,
the tools
no.
and
We've
having
got
the incentive to do it.
Yeah, we've got the tools. We've got the GDPR. We are getting the CRA, and we are getting the implementation ultimately of the NIS2. And the governments have the means to intervene. And it turns out that if you do that, that's dramatically effective. That is how they did change the airline industry. That is how they changed many industries. But you need authorities that dare to write tickets, significant tickets. You need courts to, I don't know what the English word is for dwangsom, but yeah, but it's a fine. It can be a fine without an end. Like, you know, Danny Makic has this case against X ongoing, and X already can't deliver certain data, and the fine is now somewhere in 1.8 million euros already, and counting, 4,000 euros per day. That is actually a very effective means for a company, because if you want to count beans, you need to be really good in counting. So that does make a difference. And under these laws, if you're not in control and you can't prove that you're in control, you've got a your license to operate is in danger. The Dutch Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens can shut down companies if they really want to. So be aware of your role, and start to write these tickets.
And to put it in your vocabulary, stop being a paper tiger.
Yeah. Well, and do, for the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens, it also goes, do proper legal analysis of the case before you write the ticket. That would also help.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brennan. Yes, now we've come to the end of our content session, but before we really end the session, we will make the presentations available as soon as we have them on our website, on the event page. That's one. Next to the exit to this room, there is a flip over, and I would like to ask you to do real old-fashioned pen and paper, put a stripe, a turfje, next to each speaker's name, below the number of stars you think their presentation you would give, and that's on a scale from 1 to 5. It's really bad, you put it in the column for 1 star. If you think it's really very good, put it in the column for 5 stars. And if you have any additional remarks about this meeting or any other meetings in the future, please feel free to write them down and we'll see what we can do with them. For those who have an ISC2 certification and need CPEs, we will send in a list of everyone who was here and has signed the list and has given us their ISC2 number, so that those CPEs will be awarded automatically. Yes. Now, I'd like to thank first Kim van Wilgen as one of the speakers. Etzo Botjes. En Brenno de Winter. I think they delivered excellent speeches and prompted some discussion and made us think about the subject, and I hope we won't stop thinking about it and hope together, and I think that's the main message, we need to find a solution together. We can't do it on our own. We have to work together to find solutions. And last but certainly not least is thanks to Schuberg Philis for hosting this meeting. I think we've been given excellent facilities, a good lunch, good dinner, I should say, and as an additional extra, this session is being recorded, so that will become available too as well at some point in the future. With that, I'd like to thank you all for your presence and contribution to the discussions.